And the press was trying to make us think that this was the fourth most powerful army in the world. And our military just went in and literally decimated them. There was no fight. And so, but for me, I can't help but step back and look at Israel today, obviously, and we're talking about the second coming of Christ. We've been talking about the signs of the last days. And one of them I'm going to talk about, I probably won't get to it today, is going to be the return of Israel to their land and how God has made a nation out of them and all that. But we're not going to touch on that today. Anyway, we started last week. We're looking at the different things that are going to be taking place in the world before the rapture of the church. And we started looking at them last week. We're going to look at several more. I probably won't get through them today, maybe not in the next 2 Sundays. There's a lot of things. And so what I started looking at, we started in Luke 17, and it spoke as in the days of Lot, or in the days of Noah and in the days of Lot, and they were doing these things. But the one thing I focused on was the days of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. And we talked about the sins of Sodom last week, and we begin to discuss the rise of and the acceptance of things like homosexuality and the transgender things and all of that, which is, to me, is just an absolute, I just can't believe it. I mean, I can't believe it's happened right before our eyes. And so, but that is those signs of the last days. And we went over to Revelation 18, and we were looking at verses 9 through 13, I think. And I'm going to just read a couple of those verses for you. Or maybe I'll just go ahead, just read the whole thing. In verse 9 it says, "And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth her merchandise any more. And the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner vessels of ivory and manner vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble." And it goes on, and I was thinking, I didn't even bring this up last week. It says, "And cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses." A lot of those things are things that was used in the temple. Surprisingly, a lot of these things were used there. But where we focused on was says, "and chariots and slaves and the souls of men." And I remember as a new Christian struggling to understand what that meant. But we started looking last week at the fact that there is, on a worldwide basis right now, about 50 million people being human trafficked. And for all different kinds of purposes. Some are sold into for labor. Obviously, some are turned into soldiers, domestic servants, forced marriages, sexual perversions of all kind. A large part of them are women and children, obviously. Human trafficking is the second most profitable illegal industry in the United States. And when we look at this illegal immigration issue, a lot of it that we haven't even, most of us don't even realize there's so much of it centered around the trafficking that's taken place. And you remember when John Sarah was here, and John started talking about how those parents were literally selling their children. And he was going, putting himself in great danger to go and try to rescue those children from, their own parents selling them. It was incomprehensible. And I read that in just in America in 2024, they estimate there was around $173 billion made in forced sexual exploitation. By the way, ladies, those ads for work 6 hours a day from home and make so many thousands of dollars, those are fronts for groups of people who are looking for the right kind of lady to pull into prostitution. That's what they're for. You're not going to make 5 figures stuffing envelopes, okay? And so if you want to remind your children, your grandchildren, not to be answering ads like that, stay-at-home moms, young mothers without husbands or whatever, that's really what those are. Anyway, that's just free. But today, when you look at the nation of Israel, it is one of the most open nations there is to the LGBTQ lifestyle. They're one of the most accepting nations in the world. That's why we read last week, I think, in Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, when Jerusalem is called by its spiritual names, Sodom and Egypt. It helps us to understand what that is. But what I'm saying is, we see the merchants of our world buying and selling slaves in the souls of men. That's what's taking place before us. And so anyway, that's a sign of the last days. We talked about scoffers, 2 Peter, I believe. I'm not going to go back through that. We talked about that, I think, the first Sunday, how scoffers were going to rise. And obviously, with the replacement theology that's entered the church, there's no thought about there being an imminent return of Christ for his church. They're not watching for that. They believe that the events of the tribulation has already taken place. They've already been fulfilled way back in 70 AD, even though they were localized around Israel. I'll talk more about that later when we talk about Israel as a nation. But there's about as much scoffing going on in the church today as there is, and probably more in the church than there is in the world today, because the lost world simply has no clue about the last days. Yesterday, before we thought we was just going to go down to Springfield and see the baby and pinch his cheeks, and then Saturday morning we thought we was just going to run on home. Well, our son had other thoughts, and he loves to cook and barbecue, and so he set up a big lunch for us. Got up early and put on just about everything you can barbecue, and so went over there, and so got to spend a lot of really great time. We stayed till later in the afternoon before we decided to come home. And but anyway, while I was there, I was sitting out on the deck, and one of my granddaughters has a boyfriend. Granddaughters have boyfriends, and he and I was alone together out on the deck for a while, just visiting. And so I asked him about his salvation, and he told me that he had got saved and then baptized there, and it's just a little over a year and a half ago or so. He's a fairly new Christian. And so we were talking about things, and my son and I were talking about the last days and some of those signs that were taking place, and he was listening. So he started asking questions. He had no clue. Counted, he's only been in church for a year and a half. He had no clue about anything. They were just living their lives. And so it's no wonder that we've got scoffers in the church today. Anyway, the next thing that we're going to look at is going to be in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Let's turn back to 1 Thessalonians 5. And we read a little bit of this a week or two ago, but I'm going to read a few more verses of it here to you. In chapter 4, Paul has spoken about the rapture of the church. And he says, I guess in verse 17 of chapter 4, or chapter 16, he says, "For the Lord shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. And we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. And he goes on, he says this, but of the times and seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. You are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. And he says, and he goes on and said, therefore let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. And so the next thing I was going to look at is this time of peace and safety. And even though our world has gotten very violent, when you look around at our president, what's one of the things he's trying to do? Bring peace. I mean, he's closed up the border. They're going after the illegals who are breaking the law, have broken the law because of the violence and the things they bring in. His goal is to make America a safer, more prosperous place. He wants to see peace between Israel and Hamas. He tried to get peace between Israel and Iran. That's fallen apart. That doesn't mean the Lord's will is not being done here. He's been negotiating with Russia and Ukraine. There's peace treaties going on everywhere, and I mean, you name it. In a lot of these places where we looked at there earlier, where there was all these conflicts, there's negotiations, and you know there's no negotiations between Sudan and Nigeria, and between the Republic of Congo and Rwanda, and there's peace treaties going on everywhere, and the ultimate goal is obviously to bring peace to the earth. They want to bring peace to the region, which in turn, if you keep shutting these down, it slowly will bring peace to the earth. But if you notice in this, who Paul is mentioning, he says, verse 3, for when they shall say peace and safety, and sudden destruction cometh upon them. Who are they? More simpler than that. Unbelievers. Say, look, this world is, we got peace and prosperity. And I want you to listen to something that I read. And this is from a group called Polyscience Institute, which is basically, this is a group that's drawing up plans for long-lasting peace and to do it without war. And they wrote this: peace is more than just the end of conflict and war. It is a world where everyone has access to basic needs, justice prevails, and every individual feels secure. Achieving lasting world peace requires a comprehensive approach that addresses the root causes of conflict, human security, the eradication of poverty and hunger. It is only then we can create a world where peace is sustainable and resilient, paving the way for a harmonious and equitable world. And so there's this push for world peace. People want peace in their neighborhoods. They want to be safe. They want to be scared in their neighborhoods. None of us want to be afraid. I mean, last thing I do before I go to bed is make sure every door in my house is secure. And I look out the window every direction that I can see just to check, see what's out there. Never know. But obviously we're going to get more into this peace thing as we go on. But that's a sign of what's going to be taking place in the world. There's going to be a push for peace. And it says, when they say peace and safety, and sudden destruction come upon them. All right. Another sign. The rise of basically what I'm going to call the revived Roman Empire. I mean, recent history, for several centuries back, Europe has been divided. And that was until the early 90s when the European Union, or the EU, was formed. And you're talking about a group of people that's about 500 million people strong. And this is a very wealthy part of the world. They control probably about a third of the world's wealth. They have their own currency, the euro. I think the last number I read was there's like 27 nations involved in the EU. But when we look at the Bible, who was in control of Israel and the region and the world when Jesus was ministering? Who was in control? The Romans, the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, I mean, another king just didn't roll in and beat them in battle and destroy them. They kind of rotted from the inside out. It's not that they didn't lose some battles, but they more or less rotted from the inside out. When the people began able to have a say, they began to have elections, and they began to vote themselves money. If they could get money, that was the downfall. The social structure of the Roman Empire disintegrated. There was all kinds of things going on in the Roman Empire that was making it hard on them as a group, as an empire, and they were beginning to allow homosexuality and pedophilia and all of those things to take place. They were beginning to be very accepting of it. And in fact, our founding fathers looked at some of the strong points from the Romans and used them in our own Constitution. And so the Roman Empire was a mighty empire. And what I'm going to do is take you through. I'm going to take you through some prophecies concerning the Roman Empire. It's going to lead up to the Roman Empire during Jesus' time, and then what it's going to look like in today's world. And so what I'm going to have you do today is turn back to the book of Daniel in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, and I'm going to probably start reading around verse 30 or 31. But just to lay a bit of groundwork here, King Nebuchadnezzar has had a dream, and it really troubled him, but he couldn't remember it. And so he calls in his counselors, his wise men, whatever you want to call them, the Chaldeans, and he wants them to tell him what the dream was and interpret it, which is a tall order. And obviously, they basically say, King, how can you expect us to tell you what the dream means if we don't know what it is? We can't tell you what it is, which infuriated him, and so he put out the decree to have them all killed. And so while they're out heading out to start slaughtering the wise men, which have included Daniel and his three friends, Daniel stops the head of the king's guard, and he says, "Why is the king being so hasty? Let me talk to the king. Give us some time." And so he went back and told the king what Daniel had said. And so anyway, they said, we will pray about it. So Daniel prays about it, and then he goes to the king, and in verse 31, I'll start 31. he says, he begins to give him their interpretations. And tell you what, I'll back up to verse 28. He said, he says to Nebuchadnezzar, but there's a God in heaven that reveals secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. For as for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, the secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. So he said, this isn't my wisdom, this is something that I've been shown by the Lord. He says, thou, O king, sawest and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. And the image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet were part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that stone was cut without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron and the clay and the brass and the silver and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them, and that the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. He said, this is the dream. In verse 36, we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar, or the Babylonian Empire, is the head of gold. After thee shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And for the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaketh into pieces and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these things, it shall break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of the potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay. And so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And so he lays out for the king this image, a head of gold, arms and shoulder or chest of silver, midsection down to his knees of brass, and then on down made with iron and clay. And so it's this last empire that he begins to speak about. You know, that it's a powerful empire, but it's going to have weaknesses. It's going to allow it to be broken up. Now, I want you to hold that thought, and he goes ahead and starts kind of clarifies this in chapter 7. So let's move on up to chapter 7. I'm going to start with the first 4 verses, and then we'll move down through it just a bit. Daniel 7, verse 1. He says, in the first year of Belteshazzar, king of Babylon, David had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. And the 4 great beasts come up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. And I beheld, till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet of a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And so he begins to clarify this vision, and he begins to lay out these events here. And he basically, this first entity, this first empire here, that is like a lion with eagle's wings. He's speaking about the Babylonian Empire. This is an empire which he had firsthand knowledge of. This was an empire that had, I think it had started its reign around 605 BC. Then he goes on. He said, "Behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said, Thus unto it, arise and devour much flesh." So this second kingdom that's going to rise up is going to be the Medes and the Persians. He likens them to a bear. And if you read the chapter before, you'll find that the Medes and Persians have already defeated Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's son had the feast. They all got drunk. They took the vessels out of the temple in Jerusalem. They were mocking God, and that's when we had the story of the handwriting on the wall. And Daniel came in, interpreted that, and that night the Medes and Persians lowered the water of the river, walked into the walled city of Babylon and took it. And so anyway, they came into power around 539 BC. Now in verse 6, he says, and then I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And so he's prophesying here the defeat of the Medes and Persians, and that would be accomplished by Alexander the Great. And that would happen later in 331 BC. So this is an event that was going to be over 200 years down the road from when he spoke it. The Greece is pictured as a leopard. Greece was able to come in and swiftly overpower the Medes and the Persians. And if you was to read about that battle between the Medes and the Persians and the Greeks, Alexander went after that kingdom with 35,000 men. And they estimated that the Medes and Persians had from a few 100,000 to 1 million soldiers. And that Darius knew that the battle was coming, it was going to be taking place. So he went out into the valley and actually smoothed the valley up. They went out and smoothed all the rough spots out of the valley because they fought their wars in chariots. And so they wanted to be able to quickly decimate Alexander's army with their chariots. They had things built into their chariots that would be cutting and slashing as they rode through the army and all that. But what Alexander did was he saw what they were planning, and he steers them off over into the hills. And literally the battle was so one-sided that the soldiers of Alexander were literally able to walk up and take the reins of the horses. The chariots couldn't go. And they just slaughtered the soldiers as they stood on their chariots. And if history is right, he lost about 100 men doing that. So Alexander swiftly came in and destroyed the Medes and the Persians. Now in verse 7, he said, After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth, and devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with its feet, and is diverse from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So about 185 years later, the Roman Empire rose to prominence and power, and they went in and defeated. The Greeks and became the world power that was in place when Jesus Christ had his ministry, and it carried on. We'll get into that a little bit more, but they were a very mighty, way more mighty than the other kingdoms before. Now, I want you to turn on up to Daniel chapter 9. I'm taking you a long way to actually explain a short thing, but I think it's important to understand. And I'll start in verse 1. And by the way, before I forget it, back in verse 7, 7:7, he talked about this last empire that was great, exceedingly terrible and dreadful, and it was diverse from the other. And he talked about that it stamped the residue with the feet of it, which brings the symbolism to the legs and feet of the image. But then it says that the beast before it had 10 horns. So that gives us a point forward to the Roman Empire coming back into being. Daniel's prophesying these things before the Roman Empire ever exists, obviously. And so in verse 1, he says, in the year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, which was the king when the story of Esther that took place during the 70-year Babylonian captivity. This is the king. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. So now Daniel speaks about the prophesied Babylonian captivity. It was going to last 70 years. He was living this out in his life at this point. And by the way, Jeremiah prophesied that Babylonian captivity is going to last 70 years back in chapter 25, verses 11, 12 in the book of Jeremiah. So if you want to reference that at some point, that's what he's speaking about. But I want to jump on forward. I'm probably going to get right in the middle of this, and we're going to be at the end of the Sunday school class. And Daniel now begins to point towards the last days. And begins to speak about, begins to lay out a prophecy that we're going to look at. And I'm going to start reading with verse 20. So here's Daniel. He says, and while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin, the sins of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God, for the holy mountain of my God. Here we have Daniel praying, not just praying for his sins, but the sins of his people. And I have to admit that I have not prayed a lot for the sins of other people. Daniel prayed for the sins of his people, Israel, and he was confessing them and making intercession. He says, and yet while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved, wherefore understand the matter and consider the vision. Now here's going to be where I'm going to focus. And he says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, that's Israel, and upon thy holy city, to do what? To finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision, and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. I remember reading that when I was told to read my Bible, and I hadn't a clue what Daniel was talking about. And when you just read it and you don't understand a lot of things, and you don't understand how to interpret prophecy, these prophecies and things, these things can be very confusing. And so I want to try to clarify how this timeline is laid out, how that involves not just the Roman Empire, but how it involves what led up to the death of Jesus Christ, and events that's going to take place after that have still yet to take place in our day. And a lot of that's still going to be tied to the rise of the Roman Empire. And so as we begin to look, he said, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to accomplish these things. I remember being told once that this was 70 weeks of years. And I asked the question, well, how do you know that? How do we know he's talking about, not talking about 70 weeks, 70 weeks, or 70 years, or 70 weeks of years? How would you come to the conclusion that he's speaking about 70 weeks of years? Okay. All right. All right. Okay, well, the most easiest way to understand it is simple mathematics. Notice he says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, upon the holy city, to do these things. And it says to bring in, says to finish the transgression, and to make an end to sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint who? The most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So what is he talking about? Okay, let me ask you some more simple question. Who gave the decree at the end of the 70-year captivity? Who gave the decree to go and rebuild Jerusalem? King Cyrus. And who did he give those instructions to? Nehemiah. Okay? I can't go any further because I would leave you hanging in the middle of a story that I don't want to start. But I want you all to go back to the book of Nehemiah, read the first couple chapters, and see how that ties into this prophecy of Daniel's. Then we'll pick up the math, and I'll explain how we come to the 70 weeks of years next week. Is that fair? I can see by the look on a lot of you's face you're as confused as could be. So I'll try to clear it up. I'll try to clear the water up next week. Huh? You know what? A lot of people avoid these things because they don't understand them. They stay away from prophecy. Prophecy constitutes a large part of the scriptures. They stay away from them because they don't understand them. We can't do that. It's in the Bible for a purpose. These things are given to us this way for a purpose, to understand. And so, as much as I like to teach on other things, we need to learn how to interpret the prophecies, how to understand these things, because we're going into a time where we're going to need to know. So let's close quickly with prayer, and we'll turn it over to the kids who are going to be running through the door here in a second. Heavenly Father, we love you and praise you, and we thank you for your word. We'd ask that you would help us to dwell on it this week. Prepare our pastor to preach your word. Give us ears to hear. We love and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.